The rain came down in sheets, a gray curtain washing the world away. For Cole Travers, it was just another Tuesday. He sat in the driver's seat of his rusting Ford F-150, parked at a lonely overlook on a forgotten highway. The engine was off, the silence inside the cab broken only by the rhythmic drumming on the roof, and the faint, mournful whistle of the November wind through a crack in the passenger window. His world had shrunk to this. The cab of his truck, the ghost of his past, and the bottle of cheap whiskey that was his only constant companion. He ran a hand over his face, the rough scrape of a 3-day beard against calloused skin. The face that looked back at him in the rearview mirror was a stranger's. Gaunt, haunted. The eyes a washed-out blue that had seen too much. Scars. Thin white lines mapped the side of his neck and disappeared beneath the collar of his worn flannel shirt. A permanent reminder of the IED that had ended his life as a Navy SEAL, and birthed this hollow shell. He was a ghost haunting his own life, a warrior without a war, and the quiet of civilian life was 1,000 times louder than the scream of incoming fire. The memories were always there, lurking in the shadows of his mind, the sun-baked earth of Afghanistan, the laughter of his team, brothers forged in the crucible of combat, the face of Marcus, his best friend, his spotter, turning to him with a grin split second before the world dissolved into fire and thunder and screaming metal. Cole had woken up in a hospital in Germany, pieces of his body stitched back together but his soul left behind in the dust and blood of the Helmand province. They gave him a medal, a medical discharge, and a handshake. Then they sent him home to a country he no longer recognized, to a peace he couldn't understand. He tilted the bottle to his lips, the burn of the whiskey a familiar punishing friend. It didn't kill the ghosts. Nothing did. But it blurred their edges, softened their accusing whispers. He was just starting to feel the welcome numbness creep in when the world outside his rain-streaked windshield was fractured by flashing blue and red lights. For a moment, he didn't react. The lights seemed distant, unreal, like something from a movie. Then the sharp, piercing wail of a siren cut through the fog in his brain. He cursed under his breath, a low, gravelly sound. He wasn't speeding. He wasn't even moving. He was just existing. And apparently even that was a crime now. He watched in the side mirror as a state trooper's cruiser pulled up behind him. A figure emerged, a silhouette in a wide-brimmed hat, moving with the cautious, deliberate gait of law enforcement approaching the unknown. Cole's hands rested on the steering wheel, open and visible. His training, the part of him that was a machine of discipline and protocol, took over. Never startle the man with the gun. He rolled down his window, letting the cold, damp air and the sound of the storm flood the cab. The trooper was young, his face a mask of professional seriousness that couldn't quite hide the nervousness in his eyes. "Evening, sir," the trooper said, his voice straining to be heard over the wind. "Everything all right? You've been parked here for a while." "Just enjoying the view, officer," Cole replied, his voice flat. The trooper's flashlight beam cut through the gloom, dancing over the empty passenger seat, the threadbare blanket in the back, the half-empty whiskey bottle on the floor. His eyes hardened. "I'm going to need you to step out of the vehicle, sir." Cole sighed. He knew the drill. This was the part where his life became inconvenient. He pushed the door open, the metal groaning in protest, and stepped out into the biting rain. The wind immediately plastered his thin shirt to his skin, the cold a sudden shock. As he turned, the headlights of his own truck illuminated a scene playing out further down the small pull-off area, a scene he hadn't noticed before. Another vehicle was there, a battered, rust-eaten pickup truck with a makeshift wooden cage on the flatbed. Inside the cage was a dog, a German shepherd. Even from 50 feet away, in the gloom and the downpour, Cole could see it was in a bad way. Its coat was matted with mud, and something darker that looked like blood. It was skeletal, its ribs a terrifying xylophone under its wet fur. A thick, rusted chain was cinched cruelly around its neck. A man stood by the cage, a greasy, hulking figure in a stained wife-beater despite the cold. He was yelling, his words lost to the wind, and he held a short, thick stick in his hand. As Cole watched, the man jabbed the stick through the bars of the cage. A pained yelp, sharp and desperate, cut through the noise of the storm. Something inside Cole, a part of him he thought had died in the desert, snapped. The numbness receded, replaced by a white-hot, laser-focused rage. The trooper was saying something, asking for his license and registration, but the voice was distant, muffled, like it was coming from underwater. Cole's world had narrowed to the man, the stick, and the suffering animal. He heard another sound. Not a yelp this time, but a low guttural whimper. It was a sound of absolute despair, of a creature that had given up all hope. It was the sound Cole heard in his own soul every morning when he woke up. It was a moment of recognition. In the dog's defeated posture and its terrified eyes that he could somehow feel even from this distance, he saw himself. Broken. Beaten. Caged. He had been so lost in the graveyard of his own failures that he hadn't realized he was still capable of feeling anything. But this was different. This was not the complex, messy world of human interaction. This was simple. It was pure. It was wrong. Sir, I need you to focus, the trooper said, his hand now resting on the butt of his service weapon. Cole turned his head slowly, his gaze meeting the young officer's. The trooper flinched, taking a half step back, as if he'd touched a live wire. He saw something in Cole's eyes that wasn't on any training manual. He saw a predator preparing an ambush. That man is abusing an animal, Cole stated, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. It wasn't a question. It was a verdict. The trooper glanced over at the other truck. That's Ricky Fuller. He's a local problem. Claims he's a breeder. He looked back at Cole, his expression softening slightly into one of weary resignation. There's not much I can do. Animal welfare laws are weak here. As long as he's providing shelter and sustenance, it's a gray area. Gray area. The words hung in the air, tasting like ash. Cole had lived his life in a world of black and white. Threat and non-threat. Mission objective and collateral damage. The civilian world's endless shades of gray were what was drowning him, but not tonight. Tonight the lines were drawn as clearly as a kill box on a satellite map. I'm taking the dog, Cole said, the decision solidifying in his gut like a block of ice. The trooper blinked, startled. Sir, you can't do that. That's theft. That's vigilantism. I'll have to arrest you. Cole held the officer's gaze. He didn't threaten. He didn't posture. He just let the man see the abyss that lived behind his eyes. He let him see the absolute certainty of a man who had nothing left to lose. Then you'll have to arrest me, he said quietly. But I'm taking the dog. He turned and started walking towards Ricky Fuller's truck, the rain and wind buffeting him. He could feel the trooper's indecision behind him. He could hear the young officer speaking into his radio, his voice tight with alarm. Cole didn't care. For the first time in years, he had a mission. It was small. It was pointless in the grand scheme of things. But it was his. As he approached, Ricky Fuller turned, the stick still in his hand. His face was a bloated mess of aggression and ignorance. What do you want? He snarled. His breath a foul cloud of stale beer and rotten teeth. Cole didn't stop until he was standing directly in front of the man, close enough to smell his sour sweat. He was taller than Ricky, but leaner, harder. He was a coiled spring next to a bag of wet cement. Cole's eyes flicked from Ricky's face to the dog in the cage. The shepherd had pressed itself into the far corner, shivering violently, its amber eyes wide with terror. A fresh trickle of blood ran from a cut on its snout. Let the dog go, Cole said, his voice barely above a whisper, yet it cut through the wind like a razor. Ricky laughed, a wet, gurgling sound. This is my property, pal, a prize fighter. Now get lost before you get hurt. He brandished the stick. Cole's movement was a blur. It wasn't a punch. It wasn't a strike. It was a simple, brutally efficient motion. He grabbed the stick, his grip like a steel vise. He didn't yank it. He simply took it. Ricky's eyes widened in surprise and pain as his fingers were crushed. Cole snapped the thick wood over his knee as if it were a twig. The sound was like a distant sniper rifle. He dropped the two halves of the stick at Ricky's feet. He leaned in close, his voice a chillingly calm command tone, the one he used to use to send men into the breach. The conversation is over. You're going to open that cage. You're going to take off that chain, and you're going to walk away. Or this rain is going to be the last thing you ever feel. Panic replaced the bravado in Ricky's eyes. He saw he wasn't dealing with another down-on-his-luck local. He was dealing with something else entirely, something primal and dangerous. He fumbled with the latch on the cage, his fat fingers clumsy with fear. He unhooked the rusty chain from the dog's neck. The cage door swung open. The dog didn't move. It cowered, expecting another blow. Cole ignored Ricky, who was already scrambling back towards the cab of his truck. He knelt in the mud in the pouring rain, making himself smaller, less of a threat. He didn't look at the dog. He looked away, turning his side to it, a gesture of non-aggression. He held out his hand, palm down. It's okay, he murmured, his voice soft. The words meant more for himself than the animal. I'm not going to hurt you. It's over. He waited. 1 second. 2. The world seemed to hold its breath. Then he felt it. A cold, wet nose tentatively touched his fingers. A rough tongue gave a single hesitant lick. Slowly, cautiously, the German Shepherd crept out of its cage. It was in even worse shape up close. Its beautiful coat was patchy, its body a roadmap of scars and old injuries. But as it stood there shaking in the cold, it lifted its head with a flicker of noble dignity that abuse had not been able to extinguish. Cole slowly got to his feet. The dog stayed close to his leg, a silent, trembling shadow. The trooper was beside him now, his radio silent, his face a mixture of awe and apprehension. "You're in a world of trouble, you know that," he said, but there was no heat in his voice. "I know," Cole said, not taking his eyes off the dog. He reached out and gently ran a hand down its back. The animal flinched but didn't pull away. It leaned into his touch just for a second. "He needs a vet. Now." The trooper sighed, a long drawn-out sound of a man who knew he was about to break a dozen regulations. "There's a 24-hour clinic in Westfall, about 30 miles from here. Follow me, and for God's sake, don't make me regret this." Cole nodded, a silent bond of understanding passing between them. He led the shepherd back to his truck. The dog hesitated at the open passenger door, its eyes filled with uncertainty. Cole knelt again. "Come on, soldier," he whispered, the words slipping out unbidden. "Let's go home." He didn't have a home, not really, but the word felt right. The dog seemed to understand. It placed its paws on the seat and awkwardly hauled its weakened body into the cab, curling into a tight, shivering ball on the floor. Cole climbed back into the driver's seat, the whiskey bottle forgotten on the floor. He started the engine, the heater roaring to life, and pulled back onto the highway, following the red taillights of the cruiser into the stormy night. He glanced down at the dog on the floor. Its breathing was shallow, but it was there. He had made a promise in the rain, a promise to a broken creature that reflected his own shattered soul. He didn't know where this road would lead, but for the first time in a long time, he was driving towards something, not just away. The vet clinic was an oasis of sterile light in the dark, rain-swept town of Westfall. Dr. Eris Thorne was a woman who looked as tired as Cole felt, but her eyes were sharp and intelligent. She took one look at the emaciated German shepherd Cole carried in from the truck, his own jacket wrapped around its trembling frame, and her face hardened with a professional fury. "On the table. Now," she commanded, her voice crisp and efficient. She didn't ask questions about who Cole was or where the dog came from. The animal's condition was a story in itself. For the next hour, she and her young assistant worked with a quiet, focused intensity. They cleaned the wounds, administered fluids, and drew blood. Cole stood in the corner, out of the way, feeling useless. He was a man of action, and this quiet, patient work of healing was a foreign language to him. He watched as Dr. Thorne carefully examined the dog's ears. She paused, her brow furrowing. She pulled out a small pen-like light and peered closer. "Well, I'll be," she murmured. "What have we here?" "What is it?" Cole asked, his voice hoarse. She looked up at him, her gaze analytical. "He has a tattoo. Faint, but it's there. Inside his right ear." She gestured for him to come closer. Cole leaned over the steel table. There, almost invisible against the dark skin, was a small, precise series of numbers and letters. It wasn't a brand. It was military. He recognized the format instantly. A cold dread, familiar and unwelcome, washed over him. This wasn't just a stray. This was an MWD, a military working dog. This animal was, or had been, a soldier, just like him. "He's chipped too," Dr. Thorne continued, running a scanner over the dog's shoulder blades. A beep confirmed her suspicion. She typed the code into her computer. Her eyes widened as she read the screen. This is Department of Defense encrypted data. I can't access it." "This dog isn't just property, mister. I'm sorry, I didn't get your name." "Travers," Cole said, his mind racing. A military dog. What was it doing in a rusty cage on the back of some low-life's truck in the middle of nowhere? Dogs like this were elite assets. They weren't just abandoned. The dog on the table stirred, letting out a low moan. Its eyes fluttered open. They were no longer wild with terror, but glazed with pain and exhaustion. They found Cole's, and for a moment there was a spark of recognition, of connection. Cole reached out, his hand hovering over the dog's head. He remembered something from his training, a handler's course he'd taken years ago. There were specific words, tones, meant to calm and center the animals. On a hunch, he leaned in close and whispered a single word in German, a command for calm he hadn't thought of in a decade. "Ruhig." The effect was instantaneous. The dog's ears perked. Its shivering lessened. It let out a soft sigh and rested its head back on the table, its gaze never leaving Cole's face. Dr. Thorne stared at him, her mouth slightly agape. You know the command protocols? I've been around them, Cole said evasively. He felt a growing sense of unease, a feeling he hadn't had since his last patrol. This was complicated. This was FUBAR, and he was standing right in the middle of it. He's stable for now, the vet said, pulling him back to the present. Severely dehydrated and malnourished. Multiple contusions, a few cracked ribs. Whoever had him was using him for something ugly. Dogfighting, probably. But he's strong. His genetics are top tier. He can recover. She looked at Cole, her expression a mix of sympathy and warning. But his legal status is another matter. Being a DoD asset changes everything. When I report this, and I have to, they will come for him. And they won't be giving him to you. The words hit him harder than any physical blow. They, the system, the vast, unfeeling bureaucracy that had chewed him up and spit him out. They would come and take this broken soldier, this kindred spirit he had just found, and lock him away in another cage, a kennel in some forgotten corner of a military base, until he was deemed either useful or disposable. The thought was unbearable. Thank you, Doctor, Cole said, his voice tight. What do I owe you? She waved a dismissive hand. Don't worry about it. Consider it a professional courtesy to a fellow veteran. She looked pointedly at the dog. Just get him somewhere safe, Mr. Travers. He's been through enough war. He deserves some peace. Cole spent the next 2 days holed up in a cheap motel on the edge of town, the German shepherd his silent roommate. He had named him Kaiser, a name that felt strong and noble. He fed him boiled chicken and rice from a paper plate, and the dog ate with a quiet desperation. They didn't do much. Cole would sit in the lumpy chair watching the static on the old television, and Kaiser would lie on the thin carpet, his head on his paws watching Cole. A silent vigil between two broken warriors. On the third day, the war came home. It started with a knock on the door. It wasn't the police. It wasn't the motel manager. It was too quiet, too precise. Cole's senses, honed by years of walking into ambushes, screamed at him. He put a finger to his lips, and Kaiser, as if sensing the shift in the air, flattened himself to the floor without a sound. Cole moved to the door, his body low, his hand resting on the hilt of the Kabar knife he always carried. He peered through the peephole. 2 men, dressed in nondescript dark clothing. They had the look, the hard, empty eyes and the coiled stillness of men who were comfortable with violence. They weren't cops. They were contractors, mercenaries. The knock came again, harder this time. We know you're in there, Travers, and you have something that belongs to us. Open the door, and we can make this easy. Easy. The word was a lie. Cole knew their kind of easy. It came from the muzzle of a suppressed pistol. They weren't here to talk. They were here to reclaim their asset and erase the evidence. And he was the evidence. He backed away from the door, his mind a whirlwind of tactical calculations. 1 door. 1 window. 2nd floor. Bad position. A fatal funnel. He looked at Kaiser. The dog was looking at the door. A low growl rumbling deep in his chest. His haunches were tensed, ready to spring. Easy, boy, Cole whispered. He grabbed the heaviest thing in the room, the small television, and hurled it through the window. Glass exploded outwards into the parking lot. It wasn't an escape route. It was a distraction. The men outside weren't expecting that. The moment of surprise was all Cole needed. As they instinctively turned towards the sound, he kicked the door open. Not outwards. Inwards. He had jammed the small metal desk from the room under the handle. The door flew off its hinges, slamming into the 2 men who were just turning back. Cole was through the opening before the door hit the ground. He moved like a wraith, a blur of controlled violence. He struck out like a viper, the butt of his knife slamming into the temple of the first man, who crumpled without a sound. The second man was faster. He had a gun in his hand, a sleek black pistol with a suppressor. He brought it up, but he was too late. Cole was already inside his reach. Cole's left hand deflected the weapon, his right driving the knife, not the blade, but his fist holding the hilt, into the man's solar plexus. The man gasped, the air driven from his lungs. It should have been over, but this man was a professional. He fought through the pain trying to bring the gun back on target. They grappled for a desperate second, a frantic, deadly dance in the narrow motel hallway. Suddenly, a black and tan streak of lightning erupted from the room. Kaiser. He moved with a speed and ferocity that Cole had not thought possible. He wasn't the broken, shivering creature from the cage. He was a weapon. He launched himself at the second man, his jaws clamping down on the arm that held the gun. The man screamed, a high, thin sound of agony and surprise. The pistol clattered to the floor. The distraction was all Cole needed. He delivered a single, precise strike to the man's throat. The man collapsed, clutching at his neck, his breath coming in ragged, choking gasps. Silence descended, broken only by the sound of the rain outside and Kaiser's low, threatening growl. The dog stood over the downed man, his teeth bared, a silent sentinel. He had saved Cole's life. Cole's heart was pounding, adrenaline singing through his veins. He felt alive, terrifyingly, horribly alive. He grabbed the fallen pistol, checked the magazine, and moved to the shattered window. The parking lot was empty, for now, but they would be back, or others would come. This wasn't over. He had to make a call he had sworn he would never make. He pulled out his phone, his fingers slick with sweat and rain. He scrolled through the contacts, past the ghosts and the dead ends to a single entry. Captain Wallace, his former CO, the man who had signed his discharge papers with a look of profound regret in his eyes. Cole took a deep breath, the smell of cordite and bleach and terror filling his senses. He hit the call button. The phone rang once, twice. "This is Wallace." The voice was exactly as he remembered, calm, authoritative, no nonsense. "Captain," Cole said, his own voice sounding strange to his ears. "It's Travers. I'm in trouble." There was a pause on the other end of the line, not of surprise but of calculation. "What kind of trouble, son?" "The kind you warned me about," Cole said, looking at the two unconscious men on the floor and the dog standing guard over them. "And I have an asset. MWD, call sign Kaiser. Tattoo number 7X41. The silence on the other end was now charged with something new. Alarm. "Travers, where are you? Do not move. Do not talk to anyone. Acknowledge." "Acknowledged," Cole said. He gave the captain the address of the motel. "A team is on its way," Wallace said, his voice all business now. "They'll be there in 20 minutes. They'll be friendly." But Cole, what happened to the dog's handler? What happened to Marcus? The name hit Cole like a physical blow. Marcus. His best friend. The man who had died beside him. The world tilted on its axis. He looked at Kaiser, who was now looking back at him, his head cocked as if he understood. The dog's official records were sealed, but Cole knew. In his gut, he knew. Marcus was Kaiser's handler, wasn't he? Cole asked, his voice cracking. "He was," Wallace confirmed, his voice softening with a deep, mournful sadness. "Kaiser was with him on that last patrol. He was wounded in the same blast that got you. The brass wrote him off, listed him as KIA, along with his handler to avoid the paperwork of treating a canine casualty. But he wasn't dead. A corrupt logistics officer sold his body, and the still living dog, to a contractor on the black market. We've been hunting those men for 2 years." The story fell into place, a horrifying mosaic of greed and betrayal. Kaiser hadn't just been in the same battle. He had been a survivor of the exact same moment that had shattered Cole's world. He had been lost, sold, and brutalized. A living ghost just like him. Marcus's dog. His friend's last partner. Tears pricked at Cole's eyes, hot and sharp. Not tears of sadness, but of a profound, terrible understanding. He had not saved some random dog. He had saved a brother. A fellow survivor of the blast. The last living piece of his friend Marcus. He knelt down and put his hand on Kaiser's head. The dog leaned into his touch, letting out a soft whine. The bond between them was no longer just about shared pain. It was forged in shared history, in the fire and blood of a day that had defined and destroyed them both. 20 minutes later, the motel parking lot was flooded with black SUVs. Men in tactical gear, quiet and professional, secured the scene. A man in a suit, dispatched by Captain Wallace, handled the local police with a few quiet words and a flash of a badge that made the young trooper from the highway, who had also responded to the call, go pale. The bureaucrat from the county shelter who had arrived to claim the stray was sent away, his paperwork rendered meaningless by a phone call from a 3-star general. It was the system working for once on the side of justice. Cole stood with Dr. Thorne, who had been summoned to the scene as a military vet checked Kaiser over. The dog was cleared for travel. The man in the suit approached Cole, a tablet in his hand. "Sergeant Travers," he said, his tone respectful. "Captain Wallace sends his regards. He has retroactively reversed Kaiser's KIA status. He's officially a retired military veteran. The captain has also taken the liberty of filing the adoption paperwork. According to this, you are now his legal guardian. All his medical expenses will be covered by the DoD for life. There's also a significant amount of back pay and compensation for his wrongful death. It's been deposited into an account for you. It should be enough to get you both a fresh start. Cole was speechless. He looked at Kaiser, who was now sitting patiently by his side, a silent, steadfast companion. He looked at the chaos around him, the aftermath of the violence that had, for a brief, terrifying moment, made him feel whole again. But it wasn't the violence that had saved him. It was the promise he made to a suffering animal in the pouring rain. 1 year later, the sun shone down on a small, peaceful farm nestled in the rolling hills of Virginia. The old farmhouse was freshly painted, the fences were mended, and a field of green stretched out towards the woods. Cole Travers sat on the porch steps, a cup of coffee in his hands. The haunted look was gone from his eyes. He was still scarred, still carried the ghosts of his past, but they no longer consumed him. They were a part of his story, not the whole story. A screen door creaked open and Dr. Eris Thorne stepped out, a smile on her face. She had moved her practice to the nearby town, drawn by something more than the country air. She handed him a plate of biscuits. A loud, happy bark echoed from the field. Kaiser, his coat thick and shining, his body strong and muscular, came bounding towards the porch. He was no longer a ghost or a weapon. He was a dog, happy, healthy, and loved. He dropped a slobbery tennis ball at Cole's feet, his tail wagging furiously. Cole laughed, a real, genuine laugh that reached his eyes. He threw the ball, and Kaiser took off after it with joyful abandon. He was home. They both were. Two broken soldiers who had found each other in the storm and walked out into the sunlight together. They had found a new mission, to live. And for the first time in a very long time, it was a mission they were winning.